Thank you, lovely friend. So good afternoon. Thank you. These lights are awful bright. So I want to thank the Higher Education Diversity Summit Planning Committee for inviting me to come and share my remarks. I'm truly honored that they asked and that they wanted to hear my story. So last year, the reason I came to their attention, last year I facilitated a panel, and it was a panel of women of color. And we actually talked about how women of color navigate our roles in academia and higher education. The goal of that session was to create space for women of color to share their experiences, to encourage conversation, establish networks of support. So we mostly concentrated on how to gain successful strategies for navigating spaces where women of color are not the majority. The panel came about because of a Christmas present for me. And I got a book from my supervisor. It was called Presumed Incompetent: The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in Academia. And so I began to think about how often does that happen, that we are presumed incompetent because of our gender, because of our race. And then I took it a step further to think, well, how often does it happen that we have space to talk about that? And I wondered, how could I create a space like that? And so I was thinking about it, and I actually mentioned it to Brian Hubane, soon-to-be doctor. And then I forgot about it, totally forgot about it. Life happened, I just forgot. And then it came time for conference proposals. And Brian really encouraged me to put a proposal in for The Struggle is Real for Women of Color. And honestly, the response to the session was overwhelming. It was positive, and that response, the encouragement, has stayed with me since the conference, but it's also stayed with other folks, clearly, because they asked me to come back and continue the conversation about the struggle is real for women of color in academia. And so that's why I'm here today. So, as Brian said, my name is Tamara White. I am currently the Dean of Students at the Community College of Aurora. I see a lot of my colleagues here today. It's really nice to see you all. Hey. Most of my professional career has been at higher education institutions. I spent a few years doing policy work in the Colorado Department of Higher Education, but most of the time I've been at institutions, colleges, universities, 2-year, 4-year. Besides working, I have 2 fantastic children. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. I'm also pursuing my doctorate degree at the University of Denver. I'm looking at how institutions intentionally retain African American women. So the session last year, we asked the question, how do women of color negotiate their identities and roles in order to be successful while navigating the challenges associated with hegemonic, white, heterosexual, male-dominated spaces? Big question. You can thank Brian for that. But so that was the question that we posed the panelists. That was a question that I considered. And we invited Dr. Elena Sandoval-Lucero, who's the Vice President of Student Affairs at the Community College of Aurora. We asked Janelle Lindsay, soon to be Dr. Janelle Lindsay, who at the time was at Metro State and is now at Community College of Aurora. And we also asked Dr. Nicole Joseph, who is faculty at the University of Denver. And like I said, the response was so powerful and overwhelming. Our conference session was packed. We had lots of women of color, but we had other supporters there as well. And it seemed that several people wanted to talk about how we, women of color, negotiate space in academia. So that was really exciting. So as a transition, for the next 15 minutes, I want to share my experiences in academia. I want to share some experiences that influence how I got here. I want to share some experiences that will highlight how I have established support networks, and I'm going to end with a call to action for you all. So the theme this year, how did I get here? How did we get here? I'm saying, how did I get here? It's very appropriate for me. It's very appropriate for the remarks. I feel like the planning committee has encouraged all of us to deconstruct events experiences and interactions that have shaped who we are and how we understand ourselves and others. And so this has given me an opportunity to reconsider, who I am as a Black woman in academia. It's given me a chance to think about what support networks have I created or haven't I created. And it's also given me a chance to think about how I create space for women of color to have voice in higher education. And so I'm going to share some of that with you today. So who am I? Well, I grew up in Colorado. I'm a native. Hey, anybody else? Yay, woohoo. Aurora, to be specific. And I used to do presentations around the state, and I would always say, Overland grad, anyone? Overland, yeah, anyone? That's what would happen there, too. Nobody would be from Overland. So I went to Cherry Creek School. And on my block, there were 3 families of color. There was Christian's house, there was the Jeffries, and then there was mine. And it was me, my mom, my dad, and my sister. And my parents still live in that house. And I recognize that there's some privilege in that. They've been there for over 30 years. And in elementary school, there were 3 little girls of color. It was me, Melody Green, and Priscilla Mardones. And as I was reflecting on this, I thought that it's pretty powerful that I still remember their names this many years later because there were only 3 of us. So when you say, how did I get here? I know exactly how I got here. It started with my mom standing up for me in the 2nd grade. When the school tried to tell her that I needed special education, she fought. She even cried. She doesn't usually cry. She cried. And she told them, hell no. And she did not allow them to put me in the special education program. You know what we came to find out later? Priscilla and Melody also needed special education. You want to know why? Because the school was receiving extra funding for the students of color that could get into the special education program. So, as the conference has asked us to do, let's break that down. So we really didn't need special education. But what happened to the little girl who didn't know that she really didn't need special education? What happened to the little girl whose parents didn't know that she really didn't need special education? Unfortunately, I know. She would have a much different academic career than I did. So how did I get here? Because my mother fought for me. This woman who never went to college, who didn't know that her child was going to one day get a PhD, she knew enough to fight for me at that time, and she fought for me. So fast forward several years. So now I am in one of my dream jobs. I'm the Dean of Students, as I said, at the Community College of Aurora. I have the privilege of working with a student population that I am educated on, trained on. I have the privilege of working with these students. I love my job. Anybody that asks me, I love my job. It's something where you don't have your job to complain about. It's something different. Like, 'cause all the time you complain with your friends, like, oh, my job. I don't have that. I love my job. So I have a wealth of knowledge and experience. And do you know that when I was first hired, someone said to me, you were hired because you're Black? And do you know that in that same meeting, someone else said, well, part of that is probably true, but let's move on. So let's break that down. So are you saying I was hired because I have all the qualifications for the role and there's a bonus because I'm Black? Or are you saying that because my boss is a woman of color and the college has expressed an interest in diversifying the staff and faculty, that you think because I'm Black, I was hired regardless of my qualifications, in fact, in spite of my lack of qualifications? So how did I combat this? I didn't have to for this one. I was frustrated and upset, and so I talked to my boss. She also was very frustrated and upset. because it calls her judgment into question as well. So this information went to our Human Resources Department, and they began an education campaign that included the message: we are diversifying our staff and faculty, and that does not mean we are lowering our standards and qualifications. So I commend them. Another story that I'd like to share with you still moves me, and it's a little bit of a risk, but it's my experience. So, we recently created an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council, which we lovingly call EDIC. The previous chair of the council initiated a brown bag series, which gives us as a council an opportunity to talk and discuss articles. I was so excited. You know, it's not often that you have an opportunity to talk with like-minded people about articles and just have conversations and dig deep. So the first brown bag article was sent out, and it was about an African-American woman faculty member and how she experiences microaggressions every day. And she went through and she cataloged how she experienced them and how they impacted her, and how at the end of the day she was so very tired. And I could relate to this article. So the day of the brown bag came. I got my little lunch together, I was ready to go, and of course I was late because there was a student issue, but nonetheless, I got there, I was so excited. And when I got to the room, there was a PowerPoint on, and the PowerPoint had questions that we were supposed to consider, and this made me even more excited because that meant that people were prepared. I was so excited. Then the conversation turned. A white male colleague, a member of the EDIC, asked a question, and he said, he asked a question about how to be a better ally when confronted by racist language. So a few people responded. A few minutes later, a few people tried to get the conversation back on topic. But he kept bringing the conversation back to him. And so 40 minutes later, we were still talking about him. And my spirit was crushed. We were only scheduled for an hour, and the time was almost up, and we didn't get to talk about the article. I had so much to share, and I wanted to hear so many things. I mean, her comments about her son and her experience. I was totally pouting inside, but I was frustrated. So, I took a deep breath, and I raised my hand, and I said, insert name. That is white privilege. Being able to take a conversation and talk about what you want for 40 minutes when we came to talk about something else. I wanted to talk about the article. Right. Well, at this point, I'm feeling frustrated. Like my emotions are all up in, you know, emotions when they get right up in here. I was all up in here like, ooh, I'm just so, ooh. So, it feels like this always happens. People of color space being taken away. And my thought was, how did this happen at an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council event? So I looked around the room after I settled down a bit, and my white colleague had shut down. A few other people of color in the room noticed, and they tried to reframe what I said to be a bit more developmental. Right, because I wasn't developmental. But it was out. And there were two other white men in the room, and when they came to his defense, I felt like I had made a mistake for speaking. So there was backlash. Backlash for my comment. On the evaluation, it said, Tamara attacked, insert name. So I'm thinking, wow, I attacked him? Wow, where's my voice welcome? When is it my turn to talk? When do I get to have space to debrief my experience? When do I get to feel and express my emotions? wow, I attacked him? Wow. At that time, I had been at this institution for over a year. And I felt like through one interaction, I was being labeled the angry black woman. Through both events, I've been lucky to be able to go to my boss and get support. She believes me when I tell her about my experiences. I feel like you can take a breath with that, right? She believes me. She believes me. And she has some understanding of the impact these events have on my spirit. So she has offered comfort, she has offered encouragement, and she is a source of support. Now, the comfort and support I feel from having a woman of color supervisor who can relate to my experience cannot be matched. It's phenomenal. So this is the first time I feel like a supervisor has allowed me to bring all of me to my work. All of my identities are welcome. She cares about my opinion as a black woman. It doesn't diminish my opinion to bring my experiences. It enhances it with her. So, while I am healing from all the other times I was not able to bring my whole self to my work, I feel grateful. And I hope I can do this for someone one day. So what are my lessons? I am a black woman, regardless of if I am a smart second grader, regardless of if I am a qualified Dean of Student candidate, regardless of if I am a workshop participant. I am a black woman, and I will be treated accordingly. There are not a lot of safe spaces, but I will continue to work to create them for me and others. Having a supportive supervisor that embraces all of your identities is very healing. It adds a layer of support that promotes growth and a voice. So here's my call to action for you all. I want to encourage you to help create space for black women, for all women of color, to find support, but also their voices. So when you see all the kids of color being tracked into a program, be the person to ask why. When you hear people saying someone was hired because of their identity, be the person to challenge that. And when you hear that a black woman expressing her emotion is being called an angry black woman, tell them that's not your experience of her. Be the person to speak out, because I am. Thank you. Okay, question time?